Okay, so this is the last of the series of muscle lectures. So this is muscle part 5. More or less, it's going to be tying up loose ends, hopefully as quickly as possible. Only a few things, if you pay attention, I'm going to stress that you're really going to, have to key into, for let's just say a future time. First thing you see coming up after your notes is the length-tension relationship. It's really not an important thing for any sort of examination, but if you're going to be, like, say, going to do, muscle pathology, things like that, then you need to know this type of stuff. So length-tension relationship is basically saying that whenever the muscle cell or the muscle tissue is relaxed, how stretched or how contracted is it during relaxation. What it essentially is saying is that H zone in the middle of the sarcomere, is it really close, which means that the muscle is overly contracted at rest, or is it really far, meaning it's overly relaxed? Now, either case stinks. You don't want it too close, you don't want it too far, because you understand from the previous lecture that the H zone determines how far we can pull into the middle to have a contraction. Well, if your muscles are already pre-contracted and you have this little tiny PPH zone, well, that means when you go to contract, little contraction, and there's no power there. Conversely, if your muscles are too relaxed, that means the H zone is too far. So that means that when the myosin goes to grab the actin, there's not enough to grab for a tug of war to pull to the middle. So because of that lack of being able to attach, make the cross bridge, is going to result in a poor contraction. So long story short is you don't want your length tension muscle relationship to be too small or too large. You want it in the middle, just right. Okay, so muscle tone, note that big star, just a state of partial contraction of your muscles. When somebody goes, oh, you look so toned, basically it means the muscles are partially contracted at all times. This is essential because it allows for proper posture. It allows for a proper skeletal alignment. Additionally, it means that whenever you're ready to use the muscles, they're ready to contract into work the moment you need them and not have this lag phase in between, which you kind of don't want, especially if you're running from a Rottweiler or some other dog or whatever else. All right, so next thing goes over the 3 stages of a muscle contraction. Think if you ever saw like an electrocardiogram, or if you or somebody ever gave birth and you see a contraction, how there's always this latent phase, a peak, and it comes back down. That's what I'm talking about. So the first phase, if you notice, is going to be what's called the latent period. That's whenever you see a graph and the graph is just starting to climb up before it's the peak. That's all latent. Latent means the time from the arrival of the muscle impulse to the time where you start to contract or twitch. The shortest phase, which is the top of the peak, is going to be the contraction phase. That's where you make all your power. Then you come down the other side, and that's going to be the relaxation phase. Again, all of that depends upon the tonality of the muscle and how often it's going to be used, how efficient that's going to work. So twitch, meaning how strong the muscle contracts or how it's going to contract. I'll give you a list of several factors in your outlines, but just to summarize. The stimulation intensity. In other words, are we using a large motor unit or a small motor unit? Are we calling 1,000 muscle fibers into action or only 5? Well, that depends upon the impulse and the stimulation we're using. Number 2 would be stimulation frequency. Stimulation frequency is often called TREP. As I said, you're supposed to have you're supposed to have latent, contract, and then relaxation. Well, what if as you're at the contraction coming down to the relaxation, another stimulation comes up? And then as that goes down to relaxation, another one comes up. Those are often called piggyback contractions. Women usually experience this, particularly during childbirth, whereas they're getting close to actual birth, they'll feel like they'll have this long, massive contraction. That's how you feel it. But what's really occurring is you just had 10, 20 contractions in a row. You just didn't have a chance to relax, so it felt like one long, prolonged one. So then another question would be then that stimulation frequency, how fast is it coming in, also determines the twitch. How fast does the calcium get reabsorbed by the sarcoplasm? How efficient are the pumps? How much ATP is left over? How stretched is the muscle before stimulated? That's that length tension relationship. The temperature of the muscle, I'm sure you all know, before you work out, you should warm up, because when you warm up, you're actually making the fibers have more elasticity. And number 2, Keep in mind, a lot of these reactions are run by enzymes, and the warmer you make the ambient temperature in the surrounding area, the more proficient they'll also work too. Another one is going to be the hydration of the muscle. After you work out, you drink. That's just to flush out the lactic acid and other impurities. Also, to be able to bring your blood pressure to normal and so on and so forth. One of the major things that's going to happen is going to be the pH of the muscle tissue itself. Understand, as you're working out, whenever you do anaerobic respiration in your muscles, you're not getting proper oxygenation of the tissue. Your body will resort to anaerobic lactic acid fermentation. Well, it makes lactic acid. What lactic acid does is it builds up in your muscles. But remember, myosin is a protein, actin is a protein. They only do their job if they're in the right pH range. If it becomes too acidic, then these proteins denature, which now means the myosin head cannot adequately grab the actin, which means you can't have a contraction. Long story short, big star, that's what you call fatigue. So fatigue is really just the loss of contractility or strength of contraction due to usually lactic acid buildup, meaning the proteins denature. Okay, so coming on down then, we have wave summation. Wave summation is what I just talked about a second ago, which is also called temporal summation. How soon do the stimuli of the action potentials arrive before we get to relaxation? Do you get a good hump and then get to relax and another one and you get to relax? Or is it boom, 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 all together, like the piggyback contraction? That's another one for that. Understand, if you do get the stimulus too frequently, that means that the muscle is going to be told to contract too frequently, which would then lead to, hopefully, temporary tetanus, tetany, a freezing of the muscle. It's not frozen, it's just hyperactive, but people call it frozen because it's locked. All right. So now these next terms completely for FYI, specifically if you're going to be a physical therapist. You see the words there, isometric contraction, isotonic contraction. Isometric contraction means that we are going to have a contraction in a muscle without changing the length of the muscle. Think, you're going to raise a dumbbell. Before you raise the dumbbell, you feel your arm tense. Nothing is moved. That's going to be an isometric contraction. Once we start to move the load, move the weight either up or down, that's the other side, which is going to be an isotonic contraction. So, isotonic contractions have two types, concentric and eccentric. Concentric means that I'm going to have the contraction of the muscle and the muscle is going to shorten. That's raising the dumbbell, but I'm not going to lose tension. Same thing on the opposite side, an eccentric contraction is going to be now where the muscle lengthens, but I'm still not losing tension in the muscle. The reason why you don't lose tension in the muscle, if you ever saw somebody in a gym work out completely ineffectually and completely incorrectly, let's say they're curling and they curl up and down real fast. That's stupid. That's idiotic. That basically what you're getting is an aerobic exercise. You're not doing anything for your muscle tone or strength. Hopefully you all know it's supposed to be slow up, slow down. That's so you get your isometric, your isotonic contractions, your eccentric, and that's how that all works. One major thing is if you bring it up faster, the last thing you want to do is make it come down quick. Because when it comes down quick, you're on the risk that you can actually rip the muscles from their moorings, the tendon, off the bone. No, slow up, slow down. So there's always a tension there to prevent damage to the tissue or damage to the connection, the tendon or whatever, to the bone. All right. Next, this section, huge star. Know this one, muscle metabolism. You got to know how your muscles achieve energy to do their jobs. There's going to be three stages. There's basically what we call the immediate, early, short, and long term. Okay, what you want to get is long term. Long term is more if you become, if you call yourself having fitness, or you feel like you're in shape. You get to step 3 really quickly. If you're not in shape, it takes a while to get to step 3, and in some cases you're not going to make it. Give you an example. Okay, back to my little dog chasing thing. You're walking down a street on a sidewalk with a high fence. There are 3 large dogs on the other side of the fence. You don't know they're there. They sure as hell know you're there. So as you're walking down the fence, you feel on your hip, without even thinking, fight or flight kicks in. You're not going to turn around and think of 3 large dogs coming at you and going to go, okay, come on, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to take off like a scared little girl, running down the road, okay? Now understand, when you start going off into a dead sprint, the oxygen from your lungs has not had a chance to get to your skeletal muscles yet. There's this lag period in between that your muscles still have to work But how? Well, what ATP are you going to get? This is what we're going to walk through now. So the first one, the immediate energy needs. Big, huge, massive star. Major point of this is that this is going to be like the first 5 to 10 seconds of your sprint. No oxygen has had a chance to get through your blood vessels to get to the tissues that need them. Because understand, whenever that happens, your body will prioritize where oxygen goes. More or less, everything goes to the central nervous system in your torso. Your skeletal muscles are kind of left out in the wind, dangling, hoping that they'll get oxygen, soon after that, hopefully within about 45 seconds. Now, however, for the first roughly 10 seconds or so, 6 to 10 seconds when you're taking off, what you're going to run through is something called a phosphagen system. Huge star. There are 2 enzymes that are going to run the phosphagen system. Big stars. They are called myokinase and creatine kinase. Myokinase is the one you don't want to use. Usually you see it more in smooth muscles. Myokinase, in order to get ATP, myo means muscle, kine. When you see the word kine in any sort of biochemistry, kine means kinetic energy, which usually means you're taking a phosphate from one compound to phosphorylate another compound, kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul type of thing with phosphate. Myokinase is horrible. It'll take 2 ADP molecules. From one ADP, it'll strip off a phosphate to get to the other to make ATP. But the other one now becomes AMP, which essentially becomes trash. So it's more or less the ADPs are kind of parasitizing themselves to make energy, which is horribly wasteful. You want to avoid it. Creatine kinase works with a compound called in your system that's going to be called creatine phosphate. Now, creatine phosphate is designed to have the phosphate group removed from it to then give to ATP. So creatine kinase will take the phosphate from creatine phosphate, give it to ADP to make ATP. Now, as a side note, again, people believe everything they want to see on TV or read. Why? You'll see these people that'll spend $75, $80, $100 on a jug of creatine, going, oh, it's from my workout, it's going to be fantastic, oh, it's a wonderful thing. How long did I say it actually lasts in your workout? 5 to 10 seconds max. So you're going to spend all that money for a 5-second burst when you start to work out. Does that make any logical sense? No. Here's an idea. Get a good night's sleep, have a balanced diet. Save your money. If you that's what you still want to do, tell you what, give me the $80. I'll kick you in the groin. We'll call it a day. All right. So, short-term energy. Short-term energy means now the phosphagen system has been exhausted in that first 5, 6, 8 seconds. Okay. Understand? You're still taking off down the road, going because the dogs you feel are hot on your hip. They're like 200 yards back, but you can feel their breath on your butt. So you're still running because you're losing it. Now, your body still needs energy. Second thing we do now for short-term energy needs, your body will switch to big star anaerobic lactic acid fermentation. The glycogen that's stored in your skeletal muscles will then be broken down to make glucose, and that glucose will then be not thoroughly destroyed by lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation, if you remember way back from the review, you still have glycolysis in the first step. What does glycolysis give us? It gives us 2 molecules of pyruvate. It's going to give us 2 molecules of NADH, and it gives you 2 ATP net that you can actually use. Well, the problem with lactic acid fermentation is, if you remember aerobic cell respiration, the pyruvate is then supposed to be oxidized to make acetyl-CoA, to make the Krebs cycle, to the electron transport chain, blah, blah, blah. You get around 38 ATP at the end of this. Well, that's aerobic respiration. Lactic acid fermentation, the pyruvate that you made, the NADH that you made will combine. And then therefore they make lactate, lactic acid, and that's where the story ends. Most of the energy is now stored in a molecule called lactic acid, and it's wasted. So therefore, it's a crappy way to use the carbohydrate, but your body's doing it because it has no other choice, because there's low levels of oxygen and it hasn't arrived yet. So therefore, it's got to make do with what it has. Now again, the problem with this is lactic acid builds up, and as I said earlier, that's what causes fatigue, because the proteins start to denature and they can't make the cross bridge as well. Where you want to get is the third step, which is the long-term energy. Finally, oxygen arrives from the hemoglobin to the tissues that need it. Now we switch to aerobic cell respiration, which means you get all 9 yards. You get the Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, your 38 ATP, 30 theoretically, until you keep on going. Now that will continue indefinitely, as long as you have two things. You have a proper energy source, meaning either a carbohydrate, protein, something to burn up for the fuel, and number two, sufficient oxygen supplies. Failure of either means that system will drop too. All right, so moving on down then, I already talked about what fatigue was, so big star, know what fatigue is. Again, it's just the buildup of lactic acid. Keep in mind the muscle cannot make enough ATP because, as we said in the previous lecture, ATP is used everywhere. ATP is used to cock the myosin head. More importantly, ATP is going to be used to reconstitute acetylcholine. It's going to be used to man the sodium-potassium pumps. It mans the calcium pumps. You need the ATP to put that all back together again. Also, along with that too, it's going to by the ATP, you also are able to run processes to hopefully oxidize lactic acid to basically destroy it, so that you bring your blood pH back up and the muscle pH back up. So, endurance. Endurance is just a factor of basically a resistance to fatigue. As you see in your notes, it's called what's the maximum oxygen uptake. Again, you go to a gym and you see people that don't know how to work out. It's funny. So, let's say they're on a treadmill and they're working out, having a good old time. 10 minutes into it, 15 minutes into it, you think they're dying, going wrong. Okay, understand. As you start to breathe, the amount of oxygen level in your body will increase in your blood. Eventually, there comes to a point to where you have too much oxygen in your blood that it saturates and it plateaus. So it doesn't matter how much you huff and puff; it is not going to go any higher. It's plateaued. It's saturated. That is called the maximum oxygen uptake. If you keep huffing and puffing when you plateau, that's when you get the cramp and you feel like you want to fall over and you get lightheaded. It's not a good situation. All right. So with that, through all this, you understand is that when you're making your energy, you're going to use oxygen. So you're going to have an oxygen debt. Oxygen debt means this. What is the difference in your oxygen consumption right now while you're relaxed as opposed to just after your height of exercise? That difference in oxygen consumption is called the oxygen debt. Well, as you know, it's a debt. Debts need to be paid. Well, why? Number one, you have to rebuild the phosphagen system. Number two, you want to oxidize the lactic acid. Number three, you want to put back the oxygen reserves in the myoglobin. Remember the red pigment that's found in the meat? And then the most important reason as to why you wanted to work out to begin with is all this will increase your metabolic rate so you look nice in your tuxedo or your dress for the event you're coming up with soon. Now, classes of muscle fibers is the next major subject. Again, not a whole lot here to really pull from. So it's just more FYI. Now, how we classify muscle fibers are based upon their color, their diameter, as well as whether they can fatigue or not, and how fast they contract. So you have slow and fast. Now, color. This one's an important one. If the color is red comes from myoglobin. So think, if it's a red fiber, that means there's a lot of myoglobin, which is also going to mean there's going to be a lot of mitochondria, which means there's going to be a lot of blood capillaries feeding it, which means that these fibers are designed for aerobic respiration. Well, the opposite of red are white fibers. Everything I said, do the opposite. Lower myoglobin levels. Along with that, lower mitochondria. Along with that, fewer blood capillaries. Well, how do they make do? Lactic acid fermentation in the phosphagen systems. Those are the ones, because they don't have all the oxygen and the nutrients, they got to make do. All right, fiber diameter. Now, how thick a fiber becomes depends upon how you allocate certain things within the cell, like the number of mitochondria, how many blood capillaries go to it, and the efficiency of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Now, based upon that, there are three main classes of muscle fibers. Again, nothing I'm ever going to ask you, just again for FYI. You have the first one you see there's called slow oxidative type 1. Slow oxidative type 1 also means slow twitch, fatigue resistant ones. These ones are primarily used in you for your posture, like your soleus underneath your calf muscle, The muscles that run along your back, I mean literally run along your vertebrae of your back, called your splenids, your quadratus lumborum, your rectus your rectus goes to your rib cage. Basically, I'm brain fart. I'm trying to go too fast. What they are doing is all these muscles that run down your spine, literally think of you like a puppet. If they don't work, you flop down. Well, what are they all doing is they're pulling, and they pull you erect, and they hold your head up. So the splenids, the capitis all pull your head up, keep your chin up. The rest of it from your thoracis will pull down on your thorax, pulling your chest out. Your quadratus lumborum makes sure that your top half sticks to your lower half and doesn't come apart, especially when you're doing physical activity. Now, all those are slow oxidative. So what are those? Those are your deep red fibers, which means lots of mitochondria, lots of blood vessels, which means they're designed for aerobic respiration, which also means they're going to be fatigue resistant. Now, they also tend to be a small diameter as well. The next type you see there is fast oxidative, called fast twitch A, fatigue resistant fibers. We all wish we had more of these. Only highly trained athletes have these, like people that train for like Olympics for the marathon, or they're speed skaters, or they're like distance swimmers, or those types of individuals. Now, these fibers, keep in mind, are fatigue resistant. They're intermediate in size. However, they're designed to just basically keep working and working and working, basically with no fatigue. Again, we all wish we had these. What you're used to thinking of is number 3, which are going to be the fast glycolytic, also called fast twitch B fatigable fibers. It's the exact opposite of the slow oxidative. These are going to be white fibers, low mitochondria, low blood capillaries. They're designed for lactic acid fermentation of the phosphagen system, which means, they're going to be able to make energy, but as a side note, they're going to make lactic acid, which means that they're going to denature the myosin heads, which means they're not going to grab, which means they're going to have fatigue over the long haul. All right, so continuing on to the end, muscle strength and conditioning. Now, the strength of a muscle depends upon a couple of factors, as I list there. The size of it, the fossicle arrangement. We went back all the way in the first lecture, the arrangement of the protein fibers. If you remember, fusiform versus pennate, multipennate, all those. Sphincter. So anyway, I don't know why I did that. My daughter likes it. All right, so again, sphincter. Everything's a happier, rosier day if you take that word for some weird reason. Anyway. The size of the motor unit, whether it's a large or small motor unit, whether the size of the signal and how many fibers you recruit, how fast the signals come in for temporal summation, the length-tension relationship, and probably the most important one is going to be the amount of fatigue. So, resistance exercise and endurance training. Now, keep in mind, when people work out, thankfully, within the last 20 years, this has gotten a lot better. If let's say you were a person working out in the 80s, usually you did one of two things. You did resistance training or you did endurance training. Very rarely did you do both. Resistance training would be like you working out free weights. You trying to pull against the load, grunting and doing all that stuff. Endurance training, you would think things like, oh, you're going to swim, you're doing aerobics, you're running, those types of things. In the 80s, you were usually one of two areas. When lo and behold, in the early 90s, a new shoe comes out called cross trainer, which means, you should do both. Right. Having power without endurance is useless. Having endurance without power, that's useless. You kind of need both. And on top of that, you need power, endurance, and people always forget one important thing, flexibility. Because basically, if you're very powerful and you have no flexibility, when I push you over, you're like a turtle on your back and you can't get back up again. What's the point of being big and huge if you can't do that? What, so I have to widen my door for you to walk through? Okay, but I can do this. So, Anyway. Anywho, but I digress. So, resistance exercise means, again, you're moving your muscles against the load, like working out with free weights. Now, keep in mind, as I said a couple lectures ago, you don't get more muscles. If you say you grow more muscles or I made more, you don't make more muscles. The nominal muscles and muscle fibers you have, you were more or less born with and basically are done developing by the age of 2 or 3 years of age. It's just a matter whether you use them or not. So what's it makes a muscle bigger? The existing protein fibers get more layers of protein on them, which makes them larger and fatter, or they become shorter in length. So therefore, it gives the illusion of big. They're not bigger. It's the same number. It's just that the protein fibers have gotten thicker or shorter. That's why they look bigger. All right. So endurance training, again, is resistance against fatigue. However, keep in mind when you do things like aerobic training, you're doing other things besides just helping your muscles out. Doing endurance training, you're basically teaching your body how to work more efficiently under stressful conditions because it has to be taught how to do this. When you're on a treadmill and you're running, your body's thinking, think what your mind is thinking. It's thinking, oh, somebody's after me. I got to get the hell out of here. No, you're just putting your body under artificial stress. So if that event does occur, you're ready. You're good to go. That's kind of what you're doing. You're preparing yourself, your body, for conditions which you may run against. No pun intended. Anyway, so along with that, what does it do? Number one, it's going to strengthen your skeleton. Remember Wolff's Law of bone. If you use the bone more often or put more pressure on it more often, it becomes thicker. So the integrity of the skeletal system with endurance training goes up. Number two, cardiovascular system gets far more improved. Your exchange, also your red blood cell count is going to increase. Last but not least, number three, your central nervous system also becomes heightened. That's that runner's high that you feel, as well as basically your heart becomes a more efficient pump. Now, that ends all the lecture notes for the physiology. If you notice in the outline, however, the terminologies I used with articulations and joints in the previous unit, you got to know for this one, like abduct, adduct. If you remember, abduct, adduct. If you remember, flex and extend. If you remember, supine, prone, pronation. Let's see, levate, depress. Those, just know those terms because you're going to see those again. So ends muscles, and I hope these 5 lessons were as painless as possible. And I'll see you in respiration.